In this lesson, I want to talk about two things. First of all, the minor sixth diminished scale, and secondly, how you can use that scale over a dominant seventh chord. So just to recap, in lesson 1, I talked about the major sixth diminished scale and how you alternate major sixth chords, for instance, C major 6 with diminished seventh chords. In lesson 2, I explained how that same scale can be used over an A minor 7 chord, because if you look at the notes in C major 6, take the A from the top and put it at the bottom, you've got A minor 7, and therefore it follows that the same scale can be used. Now I'm going to show you a D minor 6 diminished scale. Now, if you look at the notes of that scale, it contains all the notes of an ascending D melodic minor scale plus one extra note. That's the extra note between the 5th and the 6th, just the same as we put an extra note in the major 6th diminished scale. And the notes of the scale are harmonized by alternating D minor 6 with a diminished 7th chord. Now, Barry Harris explained the presence of the extra note by saying that 3 of the notes of the diminished 7th chord are in the D minor scale, that one, and that one, but not that one, not in the melodic minor ascending. I know it's in the harmonic minor. By adding that extra one, it means that you can alternate minor 6 chords with diminished 7th chords. Now, if we look at the notes of a D minor 6 chord and take the top note B, put it at the bottom, we get a B minor 7 flat 5 or B half diminished 7th chord. And therefore, just as we could use a C major 6 diminished scale over an A minor 7 chord, we can create movement on a B minor 7 flat 5 chord by using the D minor 6 diminished scale. Now let's get on to the second part of this video about how we can use this minor 6 diminished scale when we're playing on a dominant 7th chord. So in lesson 5, I talked about how you could play a minor 6th chord on the 5th note of a dominant 7th chord. So if we took the chord of G7, the 5th note is D. I played D minor 6 on the D and played G below it. That's a G9 chord. The A is the 9th. And therefore it follows that you can play the D minor 6 diminished scale but with G in the bass, which is what I did in the introduction. Now, it's interesting to look at the diminished 7th chords there and say, why do they work? So we're starting with a G9 chord, or D minor 6 with G in the bass. Then we're going on to this diminished 7th chord. Now, that's followed by this. If you think of that as a G diminished 7th chord, it's functioning as what we call a triple appoggiatura to the G7 chord. I talked about this use of diminished 7th chords in lesson 9. If we look at the top 3 notes of that diminished 7th chord, they all rise a semitone and they go to the 3rd, the 5th and the 7th of the G7 chord. So it creates tension and resolution. Now, of course, we're also moving the root up to the 9th. Another explanation could be to ignore the G in the bass and just think of that as D minor 6, in which case that is functioning as a secondary dominant, A7 with a flat ninth, but without the root, going to D minor 6. I think it's also worth just revisiting another scale that I talked about in lesson 10 in this series, the one that Mark Levine uses in his book about Drop2 Voicings, and it's this one. So it's basically the same as Barry Harris's dominant 7th diminished scale, except for the top bit doesn't go to E flat, it goes to E. And we can tweak 3 of those G7 chords by changing the root to the 9th. It didn't really work on the first one because you would need the 9th in there, and it's a little bit congested, and it also means putting an extra note in. So when we get to B though, if we move the G onto A, then basically we've got that D minor 6 chord again, but it just makes the dominant chord slightly more colourful. You can do the same thing there. You can do the same thing there. So that's another little option. And then don't forget that little tweak that I put in on that scale at the top bit. Instead of going to D minor 6, you can go to D minor 7. So that's like an A7 with a flat 9 but no root. Going to D minor 7, which then goes to a D7 with a flat 9 but without a root. So these are all options to create movement over dominant 7th chords. That's what the whole idea about the Barry Harris harmonic method is. It's not to think of chords as static things, but to create movement within those chords, very much like what Bach used to do in his chorales. So I hope you found that useful. If you did, I'd be really glad if you could give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't done so far, if you could subscribe to the channel, and I would welcome any comments or questions that you have. Thank you. See you in the next video.